O Lord, open our hearts to love your word and to walk in its light to the glory of your name. Amen. It's a busy Sunday this Sunday. It is, as Matthew pointed out, not only the last Sunday after Trinity, it's also Reformation Sunday, a fact which we don't often mention. It's also Bible Sunday. So I shall try and endeavour to give due attention to all three of those topics. So we should be home by about 2 o'clock. The first thing to say is that this question which is asked of Jesus is not an honest question. It's not seeking after information and an answer. It is, like most questions asked by lawyers, designed to catch you out. It's one of a whole string. Last week we had, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? They're designed to put Jesus on the spot and make him say something which will either politically embarrass him so that he loses his following, or else commit an indictable offence, say something seditious, which will enable them to charge him. And Jesus deals with all these questions in a way that leaves everybody baffled and bewildered and learning not to make themselves open to ridicule by asking him any more questions. But the answer he gives to this, what is the greatest commandment, isn't terribly original. The idea was well around in Judaism. But the interesting thing about it perhaps is that it's drawn from the Old Testament, from of all places, the book of Leviticus. The least read and least regarded of all the books of the Bible, and mostly quite rightly, unless you're planning to offer a burnt sacrifice this afternoon. There's vast chunks of Leviticus that will not actually edify you or help you very much. But in amongst all that, which was very relevant for the life of Judaism, and still at the time of Jesus, when there still was a temple, are great nuggets of wisdom. And it just goes to emphasize that we do not pay enough attention. This is the Bible Sunday bit. We do not pay enough attention to the Old Testament. We don't know it, and we don't love it, and we don't read it, and we don't preach on it. Now, yeah, sure, there is plenty of stuff in the Old Testament which is unedifying. Battles, murder, and sudden death, and blood by the gallon. But read in the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ and handled sensibly and sanely, it is actually the beginning and the basis of our religion. It is the book Jesus Christ grew up on, that the apostles read, knew and loved, and could probably recite it virtually by heart. It is the spring of our faith. And here, right in the middle of Leviticus, of all places, we have also the very foundation of Western democracy. We have the rule of law. You will receive just judgment. No one will take any account of your station, whether you be rich or whether you will be poor. You will receive equal treatment before the law. And that rule of law, as much as anything else, is actually the basis of our democracy. The rule of law is vital. Rule by lawyers is dodgy. But that foundation, that we can expect justice if we go to court, is what makes our society function efficiently and honestly, and is lacking in many parts of the world. And also, in this, we have this foundational statement: you shall love your neighbour as yourself. You shall not hate, but you may reprove. In fact, you must reprove, because if you don't reprove, you're going along with what is wrong, and you yourself incur guilt. And it seems to me that balance between the duty to speak out and speak your mind, and not to descend into hatred, is also the basis of our democracy, and a counter blow to the political correctness, the excessive political correctness which afflicts our society. And let me just say in passing, would not the world have been better if people had been prepared to rebuke Harvey Weinstein when they knew he was doing things that were unacceptable? Well, not just unacceptable, sinful, wrong, evil, wicked and corrupt. Well, you don't often get to say that in the pulpit these days. But it's true, isn't it? Things were going on and no one spoke out. Why? Because we live in a society where to reprove is to moralize, and you don't do that. But to speak your mind is the basis, again, of democracy. And to speak it without hatred is also essential. And again, in a time when politics is polarizing, it's important we hold that tension. It could well be that our politics needs to polarize. You know, it's not much of a democracy that gives you a choice between a party that wants to add 5% to some budget and another one that wants to add only 4%. There should be different views, an argument. But that should not mean that the person you're arguing with is an object of hatred and contempt. When that happens, you cease to argue and you start to shout. And if you start to shout, eventually you start to hit. And if you start to hit, you start to shoot. To argue, to reprove, to express your mind, to say what the other person is doing is wrong without implying that they are evil, is all that makes democracy possible. And all that is there in the Bible, in this least regarded place. And we forget the reproving power of the Bible at our peril. That's the Bible, somebody bit. But that leads straight into the Reformation. We mark it, and particularly making a fuss this year, because it's exactly 500 years ago, this coming Tuesday, that Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Church. Sounds very dramatic, but in fact that was the university notice board. What he was doing was giving notice of what was to be an academic debate. And he'd done it before, and many other people had done it before. But on this occasion, he struck a chord. Something about the corruption of the medieval church, which everybody knew about. Everybody was a believing Christian and a practicing Catholic. And everybody knew that the church was corrupt and needed reforming. And they'd been trying for 100 years or more to do it and failed because it was corrupt. And Luther bangs up this list of sentences, a lot of which is frankly just jibes at the Pope. But underneath it is a new idea. Drawn because Luther had started reading and paying attention to his Bible. Something which medieval theology had forgotten to do. It had achieved great things. If you read Thomas Aquinas, people still read Thomas Aquinas. Even if you're doing not theology but a philosophy course, you'll come across Aquinas. He sums up all that was then known of philosophy, astronomy, the whole lot. Not much was known, but they were beginning to recover the learning of the ancient world, and he manages to put the whole lot together in one intellectual masterpiece. But from that flows a nitpicking and a very minute argument, and in that the glory of the gospel gets buried. Just as it would do with the Pharisees eventually, when the Pharisees became the rabbis. You replace a glorious vision of a gracious God and Father of us all, with little questions, tiny, minute ones about what you can do on the Sabbath and what you can't. And so medieval theology descended into questions. Traditionally, though I don't think they ever argued this, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? It was a mockery, but that's where things had got to. And Luther, because he's got back to his Bible, says it doesn't matter a monkey's. What matters is the grace of God. And the whole structure which the medieval church had built up of earning your way to heaven through pilgrimages, through penances, through, better still, giving money to the church, collapses. And this list of objections with this idea wrapped up in them went viral, as we would say today. There was no internet, but there was, and I guess this is why it took off then where it had never taken off before. There was just coming into being the printing press. And somebody took them, copied them, and printed them. And they went right across Europe. And if you want to see the result is that Fountains Abbey now stands in ruins. So, yes, they throw out a lot of very glorious babies with some incredibly murky bathwater. But the point was the whole monastic life was bound up with this business of earning your righteousness. And because he gained touch with the God of the Bible, Luther had to say, it's not that way round. You are forgiven through Jesus Christ, washed clean by his blood, saved by his death. And because you're saved, you'll go on and do good works. But they don't add to your redemption. That is God's gift and his glory. And he loves to give you that. So don't tie God up in little knots. Don't shrink God. Don't make him, as the Pharisees were making him, a nationalistic God. He is God of the whole world. And the Messiah, when he comes, is not just the Son of David. True, though it is in a way. He is the Son of God. He is God. He is Saviour for the whole world. And as Luther said, let God be God. Give him the glory above all. Remember the first commandment. We jump very quickly these days to love your neighbour as yourself. But the stress is very much on the first one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your soul, with all your passion. That's where it all flows from. And if you forget that, if you get bogged down in the minutiae of theology, if you get bogged down, worse still, in the minutiae of church life, and my God, don't we Christians love to fall out over trivia? Don't trivialize God. Let him be God. Don't shrink him. Don't get too tied up on about how he relates to the latest theories of the universe. Don't press him to fit your politics. And don't exclude him from your politics, because he is the God of the whole world. And don't shape him so that he objects to all sins except yours. Let God be God. The God as he reveals himself in Jesus Christ, as that revelation is recorded in the Holy Scriptures, as it can only be known from the Holy Scriptures, as it is in Jesus Christ, which is, says Jesus, very simple. To love God with all your heart and your neighbour as yourself. It's all, says Jesus, very simple to say and very hard to do, particularly with some neighbours, and very hard actually to love God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind, and to trust him whatever life throws at you, in the knowledge that in some mysterious way it is all wrapped up in his love, and he does hold you in his hands. It is not easy. It is easy to say, hard to do. It requires enthusiasm on the one hand and determination on the other. And what does God require? Simply that we try and live up to that. And we shall try and we shall fail. But the glory of the gospel simply is that if our love for God is sufficient to guide our actions, then his love for us is more than sufficient to forgive our failures. This is the gospel of Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever.